Hey everybody, it's Dr. Will Cole. We're live here in our Functional Medicine Health Center, and today I have my good friend, Dr. David Perlmutter, here to talk about some exciting things because this week is the launch of the newly revised, updated 5-year anniversary of Grain Brain. Dr. Perlmutter, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Oh, well, I'm great. It's been a very interesting past couple of days. You and I have tried to connect. This is our third time, and it looks like we finally got it done. It's been a really interesting couple of days. I had the nice opportunity to appear on the CBS Morning Show, and maybe we will send out a link for that. And it was really quite interesting because they were aggressive in a way that I was not used to, but fortunately I was aware that it was going to play out that way. But I think we made some really good points about, the fact that we don't yet have a cure for Alzheimer's, and yet it is largely preventable. And that's been my message with the original Grain Brain, and now so much support in the new revised edition. So it's been an interesting, great couple of days.
Yeah, so let's talk about the CBS show. I mean, it's their point. They were coming at you from all angles, talking about the
That's okay.
Alzheimer's. What do you think the reason for that was?
Oh, I think it's pretty much the nature of how media is these days. I mean, I've been on the Today Show a number of times, CBS Early Show when it was called that a number of times, and boy, Fox News, CNN, Dr. Oz, a lot of exposure, and always have been treated with respect. People have been interested in hearing this information because we know it's important information, and things have changed. And I have to say, on that program, they right off the bat pulled up a chart, a slide from. They wanted to get another opinion about what I was saying, and who did they go to? But the sugar industry spokesperson, who said, no, we should be eating sugar in moderation. And the reality is that there's nobody on the set of that program when I was there. None of the anchors believed any of that, but yet that's what they wanted us to believe, the viewers, that sugar in moderation is a good idea for your health, that, as the slide said, decades of research support that. And I countered by saying, yeah, it's like when we were told to to smoke cigarettes because tobacco was good for our health. So, we know these days that what goes on in terms of supporting television, paying for advertisements, whether it's the soda or the high calorie sugar snacks, etc. And it's very obvious, but you put a smile on your face, you take a deep breath, and you move on. And it was okay, got to make some points, but I think the whole temperament of media has changed towards the negative. And I think it raises viewership if you feature negative attack type content. And that's just what they do. But, I feel good about myself, and I was delighted to have a moment with these people.
Yeah, I think you came out really poised and well spoken, and honestly, I think anybody watching that, a layperson or somebody in healthcare, will kind of see through that and really see that the facts you're pointing out held on its own. So for people that haven't heard about Grain Brain, I don't know how they could have not heard about this amazing book, but can you fill everybody in about what Grain Brain is about?
Sure. Grain Brain was first published 5 years ago, and the subtitle, I have it right here. Well, this is the revised edition. Let me read this after the surprising truth about wheat, carbs, and sugar, your brain's silent killers. And our contention back then, even based upon the science that was available back then, was that a diet that was focused on carbohydrates, simple sugars, and avoided fat, and even foods containing gluten could present a threat to the brain. We have plenty of scientific substantiation for those claims back then, robust scientific claims, to the extent that the book was published moving forward in 34 languages around the world. A million copies went out, and so we decided to, 5 years later, see where we are. And in the new version, I was able to bring to bear much more recent data, which is absolutely far more compelling, to really make the case for the fact that we need to cut our sugar. We need to recognize how important carbohydrates are in terms of their limitation, with obvious exception of dietary fiber, and actually welcoming dietary fat back to the table. We also updated all the literature with reference to gluten. And I think that this message is now not foreign to so many of your viewers. It's not as disruptive as it was 5 years ago, because now we all recognize that the real villain in the Western diet has been the carbs. It wasn't the fat. And all these years we were told to cut the dietary fat because horrible things would happen. And now we recognize even the American the American Dietetic Recommendations Council 3 years ago from the US government indicated that it's the sugar, it's not the fat. They pulled back from the fat, and it's really interesting. I was reading one of the comments on Wikipedia saying that Dr. Perlmutter advocates cutting our carbs, lowering our sugar, and at the same time eating more dietary fat, and how that is so in contradiction with current science. Well, with all due respect, look at the science. Look at what the American government is saying. Look at what Dr. Will Cole has been saying, and so many other thought leaders who really want nothing more than to get the message out to everybody that each of us can control our health destiny by making lifestyle changes, most importantly, by making dietary changes. And in my world, that is really important as it relates to the brain's destiny, as we live in a country where 5.4 million people have already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What I'm saying and what I said on the program was Alzheimer's has no medical treatment whatsoever at all. And yet it is largely preventable based upon our lifestyle choices. That flies in the face of what happens on television. On television, we get a drug for every one of our ails. There are, in fact, Alzheimer's drugs that are marketed. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, last month, in a research study written by Dr. Richard Kennedy, was actually a meta-analysis of the 10 top studies of the so-called Alzheimer's drugs, what are called the cholinesterase inhibitors like donepezil, marketed as Aricept, and then another one called memantine, marketed as Namenda. Not only did Dr. Kennedy demonstrate that these drugs are ineffective, but even more heart-wrenching is what he ultimately proved was that these drugs are making people decline cognitively more quickly, meaning that these drugs that are being sold in America to the tune of $1 billion, they're close to $1 billion a year, that Alzheimer's patients are taking are actually speeding their decline. And, Dr. Cole, I will tell you, it's surprising that that wasn't on the front page of the New York Times and in the evening news. No one heard about that. So that's the reality, though, of mainstream media that, go ahead and live your life, come what may, and we're going to advertise some drugs for you. Put your faith in us and put your faith in the sugar industry that wants you to eat more sugar. That's bad messaging. That is caring for the stockholders, but not the shareholders.
Absolutely.
Stakeholders, rather.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that you said. Culturally, I think people are aware that sugar impacts our metabolism, is associated with weight gain and diabetes and metabolic syndrome. I think people can get their heads around that. But I think what Grain Brain has done and continues to do, and I think CBS This Morning is still proof of that, is that we haven't made the cultural leap that sugar impacts our brain, even though it is so well documented in the scientific literature. Do you think that that is the main, you're ahead of the curve to the point where it's still mainstream media and culture hasn't caught up with the things you're talking about in Grain Brain?
Well, I think it's really an inconvenient truth, what we are talking about. It's inconvenient to have to make these choices at your mealtime between the foods that you want to eat and the foods that people like you and I are saying you should consider eating because they're better for you. Nobody wants to give up their cupcakes, especially at this time. It's December when we're doing this interview. Everybody wants to eat their Christmas cookies, but the reality is your body's cells don't know that it's Christmas or your anniversary or your birthday or whatever. they go on. So all of these dietary indiscretions do add up and ultimately lead to elevated blood sugar, increased insulin resistance. That's bad for your heart. It's bad for your immune system. It's associated with increased risk of cancer. And certainly the point that I've made is that is a dead ringer in terms of being related to risk for Alzheimer's disease. And that is not news. That was discussed, my goodness, in the New England Journal of Medicine, September 2012, in a very powerful study that followed individuals for 6.7 years, several thousand individuals, and only did one test at the beginning of the evaluation, studied their blood sugar. And what they found was even subtle elevations of blood sugar 6.7 years later were associated with dramatic increased risk for dementia. And these are blood sugar levels around 105, 110, well below the diabetes threshold. So having a blood sugar of even 100 to 105, while your doctor might say that's a normal blood sugar, everything's cool, we want our patients not to be in the normal range. We want patients to be, or people to be, in the optimal range, whether they're a patient or not. And that's the broader outreach, for people to know what our most well-respected peer-reviewed research journals are telling us, that there is a direct correlation between your annual degree of brain shrinkage, for example, and the level of your average blood sugar as measured by the A1C test. Now, most people have heard of the A1C. If they watch television, you see advertisements, I'm taking whatever it is to lower my A1C. When the A1C is even slightly elevated, that's a dramatic increased risk for having shrinkage of your brain. And the levels where it begins to be have that effect are at 5.7, 5.8, not 7. The commercials on TV say I'm grateful because I was able to lower my A1C below 7. That is nowhere near good enough for anybody that I'm going to interact with. If that ruffles the feathers of mainstream media and television programs like CBS, that's unfortunate for them. But the mission here, and I believe the mission of programs like that, and the responsibility, is to do the due diligence, find out what the truth is, and then speak the truth. And the truth here is, giving good information to people, not telling them that eating sugar in moderation is a good thing for them.
Absolutely. And something you mentioned on the CBS morning show, which we put the link below so everybody can check that out in its entirety. But the fact that having type 2 diabetes, having high blood sugar can quadruple your risk factor for Alzheimer's. When you're bringing this up, this can ruffle feathers. But
it's true. And, by and large, with all due respect, type 2 diabetes is a choice. It is very much non-genetic and very much related to lifestyle choices, the foods that you eat, the amount of sleep that you get, very powerfully related to type 2 diabetes, the quality of that sleep, and certainly physical activity. I had to connect last night in Charlotte Airport and was standing, in the terminal waiting for my next flight. And it is breathtaking to see what Americans look like. And the point, I'm not pointing fingers, the point I'm trying to make is it's not Americans' fault. They've been misled. They've been manipulated by media to drink Diet Coke, for example, which profoundly increases the risk for diabetes and obesity, for example, because of the artificial sweeteners. They manipulated into this notion that you can eat whatever you want as long as you exercise. The calories in versus calories out mentality. That doesn't gel with current science. And, you mentioned this relationship to diabetes dramatically increasing one's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. When 60% of adults in America either already have type 2 diabetes or have prediabetes, and this group of people, most adults, have as much as quadrupled their risk for Alzheimer's, a disease for which there is no treatment, then I think it's really important that we get this information out, especially as we look at some of the factors that people may not be aware of. Sure, people are aware of the idea that my dietary choices may affect my risk for obesity and diabetes. But what they may not be aware of, for example, is a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association back in 2012, the Women's Health Initiative study, 150,000 women, finding that those women who took a statin medication had an increased risk for this very diabetes by 71%. In other words, taking a statin drug because of your need, whatever that may be, to lower cholesterol is at the same time dramatically increasing your risk for diabetes, i.e., Alzheimer's as well. And what will happen is, of course, you'll just get another drug added to the cocktail. And for men, the increased risk is 46%, taking a statin drug published in the journal Diabetologia. So this is the information contained in the new book, the revised edition, that it's so important for people to embrace. And I think that the fact that you and I had some technical issues and couldn't connect over the past few days is really good, because I'm feeling a lot more passion in my heart now, having experienced what I've experienced the past couple of days. And really, I think we're picking up on that I really want to get this message out to as many people as will listen, that we are the arbiters of our health destiny. It's not in the form of a pill.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel that too. And I think things work out for the good. And I think that you've been emboldened in a way, and you're saying everything with grace and kindness. Again, we're not shaming anybody or putting anybody down. This is really to save people's lives and improve their quality of life as well. And as you know, many people don't know that in the scientific literature, Alzheimer's is referred to as type 3 diabetes. What you're saying is really bringing this to the mainstream, allowing people to know this.
Well, I think that it isn't like diabetes in many regards because it is very much involved in insulin resistance, for example, while diabetes is as well. But you can be insulin resistant and have a normal blood sugar. You can have Alzheimer's and have a normal blood sugar as well. But by and large, we know that these things run parallel. And I think that dot connection is critical. There's this powerful relationship between having type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's risk. And that is, if your viewers take nothing more from our time together, that is the take-home message. Because while we can't treat Alzheimer's, and in fact, the drugs that are marketed have been shown by the American Medical Association to make you worse, we can really have a huge impact on risk factors. Inflammation, having a big belly, having higher levels of abdominal adiposity, being diabetic, having insulin resistance, sedentarity, not aerobically exercising, very important, having poor quality, non-restorative sleep, higher levels of stress. We can change those. We cannot change our gender in terms of our genetically determined gender. And I say that because women have twice the risk just by virtue of being women as do men. I mean, that's kind of a given. We cannot change other aspects of our genome, like whether we do or don't carry the APOE4 allele, which you will learn if you do a 23andMe. But having said that, yeah, we can sure offset the risks that are imparted by these genetic predispositions, not genetic determinants. There are plenty of people who carry the APOE4 so-called Alzheimer's gene who are cognitively just fine. Many of these people do engage in a lower sugar diet, get a regular aerobic exercise, and have paid real attention to the quality of their sleep. They've offset that genetic risk. So that's kind of a relatively new notion. In my time in medical school, genes were considered to be pretty well hardwired and determined everything about your destiny. We now recognize that is not true.
Yeah, absolutely. So people are hearing this conversation, and many people probably for the first time are hearing, wow, I didn't know grains and high sugar could be impacting my brain and my health like this. So what are some nutrient dense alternatives that you would recommend for people to have instead of grains?
Great question. I would refer people to a really terrific book I recently read. It's called Ketotarian. Perhaps you've heard of it. So I think what we need to recognize is, first of all, the broad strokes. We want to do everything we can to reduce simple carbohydrates, non-fiber carbohydrates from the diet. And that's why grains get left out, because grains are really the best way to spike your blood sugar, even before we get to the gluten issue. And frankly, there is no gluten in rice or corn for that matter. Risky for the other reason, which is they're going to spike your blood sugar if you eat more than a small portion. So I think we need to focus on good fat, olive oil, the fats we get from nuts and seeds, from if you choose to eat meat, grass-fed beef, you choose to eat fish, wild fish, eggs from free-range chicken, those free-range chicken. But as you so eloquently described in Ketotarian, we can be vegetarian and be on the right diet with certain caveats to pay attention to. I'll refer people to that book to pay attention to those caveats. So the main thing is to focus on higher levels of fat, quality protein, and by all means, lots and lots of fiber, which by definition are vegetable-based. There is zero fiber in any animal product, just the way it is, just like there's zero cholesterol in any plant product. So those are the broad stroke recommendations for what we can do to be healthy. Unfortunately, wheat in and of itself is found in 40% of the foods marketed to Americans. So as a single food, wheat represents this large encroachment on the human diet. And it's interesting to note that the human brain throughout our entire history has been increasing in size to the extent that it has tripled in size compared to where it was when we first defined ourselves 2 million years ago. Tripled in size. But that increase in size came to a sudden screeching halt about 12,000 years ago. All of a sudden, for the first time in human history, we see that the size of the brain compartment, as revealed in the fossil record, has begun to decrease to the extent that now the human brain is about 10% smaller than it was 12,000 years ago. Well, gee, did we suddenly change genetically 12,000 years ago? No, we didn't. What did happen at that point was we were domesticated by the wheat plant. The wheat plant was clever enough to domesticate us humans to serve in terms of spreading its seeds around the world. So now that we are being manipulated by the wheat plant did some very ingenious things to make that happen. It created itself in such a way that when it is consumed, it contains morphine-like chemicals that absolutely drive addiction. It raises our blood sugar that makes us crave that as a very powerful source of simple carbohydrates, making us never stop from wanting more and more. It's also created a way that it can last a long time, so it can be stored and we can travel with grain, which allowed us to discover areas for the Europeans to discover America, because prior to Columbus arriving in America in 1492, I guess America didn't exist, despite the fact that there were more than 4 million humans living here wonderfully, thriving prior to Columbus's arrival and his dependence upon wheat as a portable fuel source. So I think that, things happened with the advent of agriculture. We shifted our nutrition to one that requires that we eat much more frequently, which is what happens when you shift from a fat-based caloric resource to a carbohydrate-based caloric resource, because calories from carbs are burned through their ultimate denominator, which is sugar or glucose, which gives us fuel for very short periods of time, as opposed to being on a more ketogenic diet where we have reservoirs of slow-burning, very efficient fuel. So we've had to eat more frequently, and in so doing, we've developed this need and desire for higher and higher sugar foods because it stimulates our reward pathway. We cater to ourselves, we treat ourselves by eating more and more sugar, and we can never get enough. I mean, Dr. Robert Lustig has been so pivotal in getting that message out about the addictive nature of sugar. And even on functional MRI brain imaging, we see that we light up the addiction centers of the brain when we consume sugar, and we can never have enough. We always want more and more. So that's what has happened to human nutrition. And gee whiz, we got to call it out. And the reason we call it out is because people can then make changes.
Yeah.
That's what the empowerment part of the story is all about. It's about being a doctor, and that means teacher. It means from our perspective, meaning you and me, our job is to do the very best we can to review as much information as we possibly can, and then work in a way as to get that information out to as many people as will listen, with the goal that we offer being better health, being disease resistant, and actually extending the length of time that we are able to exist on this planet. And I say that in the context of the recent announcement that for the first time in our history, the lifespan of both men and women in Americans is now declining. Again, we didn't change genetically. We've changed epigenetically, and that's been the message behind Grain Brain, and now the message behind the revised edition, which I'm going to just say I'm happy to see is the #1 dementia and Alzheimer's book in America. It makes me happy because I like it. I'm grateful my book is doing well, but I'm so grateful that people are reading it and taking notes and implementing these really important lifestyle changes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that, I mean, you know this, but maybe you don't see fully, but this book has been a cultural game changer for people. And I think with the new revised expanded edition, it's only going to further impact people positively and change society one person at a time, one reader at a time. There's no doubt
Yeah,
about
and as you well know, more than 99% of these people we will never meet. So you're impacting people from afar that you will not interact with or be thanked by or be castigated by. And I often say it is like when you buy your coffee at a Starbucks or wherever it is, it's like putting the dollar in the tip jar without anybody seeing, without the barista seeing that you did that. Just do it and to express gratitude without having to be recognized for that. That's a very empowering experience for you. I mean, for the person who does it. So and the work will continue. And you know, with time, I think there'll be much more validation of what we've said. But at the same time, there may be changes in ideation and in messaging that we all in this area adopt or recognize as being important. What I'm saying is my words may be different in 2 years when you interview me again. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Did I say we should eat less dietary fat 25 years ago when I was interviewed and wrote a book? Yeah, I did. That was the pervasive knowledge at that time. We've come to realize that industry influenced what was published in medical journals, and I fell for it. But there's a great line from The Who, we won't be fooled again.
Very well said. So other than the book, which that's exploding again, what else do you have going on in your life professionally that people can get excited about?
That's a great question. And we're putting together a video series where I'm actually interviewing the world's leading authorities in Alzheimer's, its prevention, a future hope for its treatment, its relation to so many of our leverageable lifestyle choices. That will be coming out as soon as we do of course, all the filming. I'm also in the midst of editing a journal, a book, textbook for physicians, for clinicians and researchers, not for the general audience. It's called The Microbiome and the Brain, We have a handful of researchers at Harvard, Oxford, MIT, UCLA, University of British Columbia, all contributing chapters in their particular areas of expertise. And that's really an exciting endeavor. Of course, I'll write the introduction about why it's important, but the heavy lifting being done by people who are much better suited for that part of the work. I have a book coming out in 2020 called Brainwash, which is written with another physician named Austin Perlmutter, MD. And he is our son and board certified in internal medicine. And this is a book that really focuses on our ability to regain connection to the part of our brain that lets us be happy, that lets us be compassionate and empathetic, and understanding the long-term consequences of our actions today, and distancing ourselves from things like impulsivity and negativity. So I think that is very, very exciting, especially in these troubled times when we need to recognize the goodness in all of us and how desperate we are to leverage that goodness for the sake of our own survival and even for the sake of the planet.
Amen. Great stuff. I'm excited for all of that. I'll be waiting for all those things to come out, and I'm sure all of the viewers right now will be waiting the same. Thanks so much, my friend, for taking the time out and sharing your heart and this great information. I really appreciate it.
Great. I'm glad we finally got the technology to work in our favor.
Well, I'm happy to. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Will.
Bye.